we are here.
And I'm still inviting people.
Ah.
So here we are.
So welcome to another webcast after our hiatus from the holiday. We had a good holiday.
Yep, we got a new little dog.
Yes.
So.
His name is Oreo because he's black and white.
Yes, and he's a little turd, but he's got a lot of issues, but we'll work through them.
Mostly a Maltese.
Yeah, he's a multi-poo.
Yeah.
So, but he's cute and he's lovable to me. He doesn't like men, hats, motorized thingies, or what's the other thing he doesn't like? Men, hats, and
being startled.
Yeah, well, he gets startled
Being
by a
left
lot of
alone.
things. Yeah, he goes nuts when I leave the house. But anyway, so
But he's only been here since Friday, so.
a week ago yesterday.
Yeah.
So this is day 9.
Yeah.
But he does escape, and
Yes,
so
we had him run off on Friday morning.
I got a call from a lady. I think I have your dog, and I thought she meant my other dog that has been missing for 5 months. And she goes, he's black and white, and I'm like, that must be him. And I said, is he kind of old and decrepit? She goes, no, he's young and he looks well groomed. And I'm like, what? And she goes, yeah, he has tags. I'm like, my dog doesn't have tags because the one that took off didn't have his tags on. He was chipped, but he didn't have his tags on. And then she looked, she said, yeah, it says Oreo. I'm like, what? When I left, he was in the house. So he had gone out in the backyard with my daughter, and the gate had been left open by someone who was working at the house. And he sneaked out, the little turkey.
Yes.
So anyway, so nothing but fun all the time.
Yes. Brittany wakes me up an hour before I'm normally supposed to get up, saying the dog has disappeared. And I find him in the front yard, and he takes off, and I go running after him in my pajamas, bare feet.
And he probably took off because he's a man. That's what
Right.
we're guessing. Because when I call him, he comes. So and he
lots
came
of
to the
fun.
lady who he doesn't know. So I think it's more about the fact he's male and he saw him and split.
The dog's a rescue, and we have no idea what his life may have been like before we got him. Apparently, he's had some difficult times.
Yes. Oh, other dogs. That's what he's afraid of.
Oh, yeah.
So my daughter brought her dog over, who is just overly gregarious. Bella is like super like, I want to play, I want to play, I want to play. And she's like crazy about it. She loves the dog park. She loves other dogs. And my dog just shook from tail to nose. He just was not cool with it.
Yeah.
So we've got some issues to work through. But anyway, he's cute, and that's all that really matters. And he loves me, and that's really, really all that really matters.
Pretty much.
So, so I want to let you guys know we do this in 10-minute segments now. I'm still inviting people. We do this in 10-minute segments now. So at the end of 10 minutes, any questions that come in or comments, we will put those in at that time. If you come up with a topic that you want to have us talk about, we will take on any topic. So just tell us in the comments, or you can email us at info@theology.edu. And there, I finished.
Okay.
Oh, I just need to share it with the other things I share it with. Let's
Okay.
see.
Anyway, we're running a little bit late today because
Yes.
we just didn't get out of the house on time. Today's episode is on where to go? Living in another romantic era. And what that means is that we are living in a period of time in history which is dominated by emotion as opposed to reason. We are definitely not living in an age of reason.
You saying that makes me angry. I just want you to know I'm super angry about that.
Yes.
Change your mind. I'm angry.
Yeah. I mean, you see it reflected. I mean, it's something that's been building, and it's we're right smack dab in the middle of a romantic period. But even as far back as when the first Star Wars came out, and what does Obi-Wan tell Luke, rely on your feelings.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Well, that whole follow your heart thing.
Yes,
and
the follow
all
your
that.
heart things, and you can depend on your emotions and what you feel and all
Chase
that.
your dreams.
Chase your dreams, and it's reflected in so many different aspects, but people are more concerned with what they feel about something, and facts be damned. The last Romantic era was approximately from 1800 to 1890. They last a while, and so we're nowhere close to being over with this one. They last, well, a couple generations. And actually one could argue that it, to some extent, just continued. There are aspects of reason in our civilization. Obviously, our civilization would not exist without reason, but it's mostly in the STEM subjects. Science, technology, mathematics, engineering, because how you feel about the bridge really doesn't matter. If it's not put together properly, it's going to fall down. How you feel about the space probe that you've sent to Mars doesn't really matter. If you haven't done the math right, it's not going to get there. Feelings really don't care about reality, and that's the difficulty with feelings. Now, as human beings, we are by necessity both emotional and rational, and those two things can work together in harmony and are very useful. But we've gotten to a point now where feelings dominate, and you see that reflected. Well, I like to compare modern politics to sports.
Larice said she's not hearing anything.
Is this... Okay, let's check the
Oh, yeah, check that little setting.
settings.
Nope, it's all the way up. Oh, she has sound now. Okay, never mind.
Okay, never mind.
Okay, thanks for letting us know, Larice, because we have this weird setting in the software that will reset itself lower.
Sometimes.
It's happened, yeah, sometimes it's kind of random, so we're not sure why it
Yeah,
does
we had
that.
it last week with the live stream for the church on Sunday morning.
And I couldn't figure out why the volume wasn't going up high enough, but I didn't want to fuss too much. I put up the sound on the
Soundboard.
on the soundboard, and especially when Robin was preaching, because it was really low and he was talking loud enough, so I moved his thing up, and then somebody from church that was on doing it on live stream, she said I could barely hear Robin, and I thought, oh, I bet it's that setting in there. So I checked, and sure enough. It was down to like 45 or 50.
Yeah,
percent.
it's supposed to be about 93 or 96.
Anyway, thank you, Larice, because we want to make sure people can hear.
Yes. So anyway, Romantic era is a period, I mean, it has positive impacts on, say, music styles, literary, that sort of thing. Where it creates problems is when it leaks into policy areas. And like I was starting to say before, the question about whether or not you could actually hear us, it is politics today has absolutely, and really, politics rarely has a whole lot to do with rationality, but it's extremely bad at the moment, and politics too often devolves to being like two sports teams. If you watch rabid sports fans and they're watching their team play, their team can do no wrong. It's always the officials that are blind, stupid, on the payroll of the other team, whatever. The other team is cheating, on and on and on. I love the Dodgers, but I recognize when I watch them,
They're not infallible.
they're certainly not infallible. And if the Dodgers lose, the reason they lose is because the other team played better, or because they played really badly. So, for instance, on Thursday night, they played Arizona, and they played really badly, and they consequently lost. It happens. But some people can't look at things objectively and realistically like that because the emotions take so much of their mental capacity that they can't see past it. And in politics, you see it all the time. But we see it in other aspects of life. And of course, a lot of times what we'll do in, say we decide that we need to buy a new car, part of that is not always entirely rational. It's a lot of emotions. And then you buy the car largely because of emotions, and then you will find reasons to justify your purchase afterwards. It's just the way the human mind works. Emotions are our default setting, and so romantic eras are very, very common and frequent. There is ultimately always a reaction against it because there's a realization at some point that, this has gone in a ridiculous point. And so I found this quote from Jonah Goldberg. He used to write for National Review, and he now has his own thing called The Dispatch that he does. And he wrote on August 7th, so this is very recent, said, at some point in the future, people will look back at how the left has made two contradictory arguments at the same time. When it comes to sexual identity, the word has gone forth to oppose, quote-unquote, artificial categories, quote-unquote, false binaries, etc. People can define themselves sexually without any regard to medical science, never mind tradition or political or cultural orthodoxy. I've lost count of how many genders there are now. Just last week, CNN was so scared of using the word woman, it tweeted that individuals with a cervix are now recommended to start cervical cancer screenings at 25. Meanwhile...
That's how I want to be referred to now, as an individual with a cervix.
Yeah. Well, J.K. Rowling, and she's been falsely accused of being... transphobic, which is not the case. She commented on something similar to this and said, we used to have a word for that. Woman, something like that. And then he goes on. Meanwhile, when it comes to race, it's all about new artificial categories and enforced binaries. White people who pretend they're black are committing theft. Heck, white people who cook non-white food or pay homage to non-white art forms are committing theft. Cultural appropriation is evil. But gender appropriation is something to be celebrated. Biological males can collect all the women's track and field awards, and that's perfectly fine. But don't you dare wear dreadlocks if you're not black. It's just weird, and these are weird times. It's not that we're in weird times so much as we are in a romantic era, where feelings are what matter.
I keep thinking of that song from the 70s. They play
Feelings.
Yeah, that song. It was always on the Gong Show. Like every show, they would have somebody singing Feelings, and they would get gonged.
Yeah. Well, you had, through the 50s and 60s, you had a tremendous upswing in romantic thinking and an emphasis on feelings and all of that. And so facts tend not to matter so much in an era of romanticism. Instead, it's the stories that we tell. Next week, we'll be looking at intersectionality,
critical
race theory, and the one verse. And critical race theory, a lot of it is that it is non-rational. And they don't want to depend on rational arguments. It's going to be based on stories that we tell. That is, the narratives that we have, power structures, and all of those sorts of things. And again, this is something that fits within a romantic era, but it is decidedly non-rational. And of course, the problem with a non-rational outlook on the world is that it is at its core, and it doesn't really matter because you're all about the feelings anyway, is that there's no consistency within it. That is, even in a romantic era, there are pockets of rationality. Like I said, in the STEM area, you can't get past it. But then those that are not part of STEM will use science, for instance, as an authority figure. That is, science says this. And of course, that's not really how science works. Science is more of a verb than it is an authority figure. It's a methodology. It's a way of figuring out what is true versus what is not true. And again, within the Romantic era, it's not what is objectively true, it is my truth. It is what works for me, or what I feel works for me, or what I would like to have work for me. Not necessarily that it actually does, but I would prefer to think that it's going to work for me. But in the bottom line in the Romantic era, and any of the movements that come out of that way of thinking, is that they're self-negating. Because once you deny rationality, and once you eschew the use of reason, then how do you make your point?
Right.
How can you prove what you're saying matters or is true? That is, if everything is equally true, then nothing is true. It just becomes nonsense.
Or if it's only true for you, then what's true for me?
Yeah, and what if they're in conflict?
Right.
There is a book that has come out recently trying to justify looting. And it's, again, it fits within the Romantic era, but it is at its core a ludicrous point of view.
Well, there was that government person, I don't remember who it was, that said that the needs of the looters should be considered before they're prosecuted, before they're charged for their crimes. And I had heard that, well, maybe these people are hungry. Then why are you stealing sneakers?
Yeah, you can't eat those.
Clothing. Yeah, you can't eat those. So, or it'd be a bizarre diet if you did.
Yeah.
You know, so I question the rationality of that statement.
It's not rational.
Right, it's not rational. It's like, well, they have needs. Okay, so
if a man has needs,
right.
yeah.
Hey,
how that's going to work?
Apparently, Bill Clinton had needs, but we impeached him over his needs. Maybe we shouldn't have done that. So,
Well, the Me Too movement, again, it's feelings, and so it's selectively applied. It's applied to one's political opponents, but not to one's political colleagues.
Right. Which we have just seen.
Frequently.
Very frequently.
It's the norm.
Yeah.
Again, what's true for, my truth. But it's the nature of a romantic period of time in history. Which is, in some sense it's weird, but in other senses it's not, because this is human nature. As human nature is self-centered. That is, what is in it for me? Altruism is incredibly rare. We've got the one episode of Friends where, oddly enough, Joey is the voice of reason, and he says that, there is no such thing as altruism, really. That is, there's always something you're getting out of it. And Phoebe tries to prove...
No, that was Phoebe. No, Phoebe is the one that says, because she doesn't like PBS.
I know, but she wants to prove Joey wrong. That is, she wants to do a fully altruistic act where she does something and she gets nothing out of it.
Okay, well, her argument was that anything that you do, I'm pretty sure, anything that you do, you get something out of it.
Right.
And that she doesn't want to get anything out of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Joey is telling her that that's not going to work.
Right.
And it doesn't through the whole episode. Because every time she attempts to do something, she always gets some benefit back from it. And that tends to be the reality. That is, even if you, say, gave money anonymously, what you get out of that is the good feeling from it. If you don't give it anonymously, then you get the tax write-off, you get the notoriety, you may get your name on the building, whatever. That is, you gain some benefit. We call it virtue signaling. That is, the essence of virtue signaling is that you're getting some benefit as a consequence of being good.
Well, it's to make yourself look better.
It makes yourself look better
in a public
judgmental society. That'll be another episode that comes up, the unforgiving world. That is, we live in a world that is very much about punishment. Forgiveness
And you would
is
think
rare.
in a period of time when emotions are at the forefront, that forgiveness would be like a thing. Like,
No.
well, other people feel bad for what they do, so we should forgive them and that. But it's not. It's actually the opposite,
very
because we're fallen
judgmental.
creatures. Yeah.
Yes, we are very. But see, this is something I pointed out before, and Paul makes this clear in Colossians, that worldliness is not running amok. Worldliness is extreme legalism. That is, from the beginnings of civilization, some of the first documentation, well, the first written texts are economic texts. You know, how much is being paid for this? So keeping track of, where money is going. And then the next thing that comes up are rules, the laws. If you do this, this bad thing will happen to you. And the laws tend to be very harsh. And that's human nature.
You're seeing that now. We're going to talk a lot about that next week. Is the rules in intersectionality and critical race theory are so complex that it's really virtually impossible to follow them.
Yes.
So you will violate, by following them, you will violate them.
Yes, which is a feature rather than a bug, oddly enough.
Okay.
Because part of the essence of legalism, and the more complex your legal system is, the better it is for you, because then you can get people to finagle things so you can get away with stuff, and you can actually continue to do what you want to do without getting in trouble. And so you have lawyers that will tell you, okay, well, if you do it this way, then you get away with it. The example I've used before is for those Christians that believe that going to movies is a bad thing. Well, then they ask the question, well, what is a movie? And then you define movie in a narrow enough way that you can get away with still watching movies but not getting in trouble by violating your so-called conviction.
Even the president used that to his advantage as well, because he said that all of his rallies now are called peaceful protests, so that nobody can say that they're violating any rules of any of the COVID rules, because peaceful protests are not under the COVID rules.
Right.
So that's what our church services are too. They're peaceful protests. Although we're socially distanced, we're a very small group, so it's not really a thing. But when they tried shutting down churches again, the joke was, well, we'll just be a peaceful protest and we can come to church.
Yeah, but that's the essence of legalism. And again, it's part of human nature. This is one of the things that is important to recognize about what we see going on and the way people act, and as weird as it may seem at any given point, is that it's still consistent with the nature of human beings. That is, we are more emotional than we are rational. And so romantic eras are going to dominate human history, that is, ages of reason are the exception rather than the rule.
But I think we see in Spock that being totally rational it doesn't work.
No.
Anything in its purest form is not okay.
Yeah. Well, it's what, Aristotle talked about, the golden mean, and the author of Ecclesiastes talks about not going to extremes. Don't be too good or don't be too bad. Find balance. That's in chapter 7 of Ecclesiastes if you want to read it.
Which, for some context, Ecclesiastes is an experiment in a strictly horizontal life.
Right.
That's a life without God. So, in a life without God, all things in moderation.
Yes.
And
it's the other thing to keep in mind about Ecclesiastes is it's an essay. And so it has an argument that it's making. And so you've got to follow the thing all the way through to get the whole argument and understand what's going on. You can't take just bits and pieces of it. You have to take the whole thing. You have to take it as a whole.
Right.
If you take little bits and pieces, then you get very weird. Like my life verse, Ecclesiastes 10:19.
He's going to look it up. He
I'll look
forgot.
it up. Well, I'm never
Well,
good at quoting things.
2 books of the Bible that are really dangerous for quoting just verses like out of context are Job and Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, oddly enough, both what are classified as wisdom literature, which is a genre of literature of the ancient Near East that we don't do anymore.
We did, one of our women's retreats, a book was suggested that we do, and it heavily relied on the book of Job for the text for the book that we went through. So I spent a lot of time checking to see, were they quoting the friends or were they quoting Job or God? Because if you're quoting the friends and using that as truth, that's patently false, because God even says everything they've said is a lie. So if you quote the friends of Job, then you're just perpetrating a lie. So there were some things I had to give qualifying statements for, and we had to, they were good concepts, but they were poorly illustrated from the book of Job. And so, and there was one thing that was really shaky that I just told him, I said, you really can't find biblical evidence for this. It's basically going, okay, I have this thought, I'm going to jam a couple of verses in there to support my thought, and that's not how you do it. You look at scripture and you let the truth flow from the scripture, not
The other way
shove
around.
the scripture into your truth.
Which, unfortunately, tends to be a way that people will do most biblical exegesis. It's actually a bit more exactly classified as eisegesis, reading into the text. But we do it with all sorts of texts. As people find inspiring quotes, and to hell with the context of them. And so Ecclesiastes 10:19, a feast is made for laughter, wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. Which, is very amusing, but it also illustrates the importance of knowing the context.
So Tim said he was trying to quote. He kind of had a Biden quote moment. His thing was 10:19. A feast makes merry. Who does something? LOL. But money is the answer for everything.
Yeah.
So good try, Tim. But just look it up. But he also said Ezekiel 4:19 or 9, something about bread, cooking bread over dung. Maybe he's talking about.
Well, Ezekiel is a prophet, and being a prophet is an unpleasant task. And he had several unpleasant things that he had to do to illustrate, that is, to serve as a picture of what was going to happen. That is, he was like an actor or a painting to show the Israelites, what was going to happen. And so one of the things that he was required to show was what it was going to be like when they went into exile during the time that the nation's capital was destroyed by the Babylonians. They're dragged to exile, and what life would be like during that period of time being dragged to exile, that you'd be scrounging for food, you'd be hungry, it'd be bad, and you'd make do with whatever you could. And so God has him make bread out of several different leftover grains, not grains that you'd normally make bread out of. And then he was instructed originally to cook it over human dung. God said, okay, fine, you don't want to do that. You can do it over cow dung. Slight improvement.
So that Ezekiel bread is super healthy because it's after the book of Ezekiel, right?
That's what there's a company that sells something called Ezekiel bread that they make out of the stuff that Ezekiel is told to make this crappy bread out of. And they sell it as, here is this good healthy stuff. No, it's the food of exiles that are on the verge of starvation. They're making do with whatever they can find.
And it was cooked over cow dung.
Yes, I doubt that the company actually cooks the stuff over cow dung. But anyway.
I laugh every time I see that Ezekiel bread because I'm like, somebody's buying that. It ain't me, but somebody's buying it.
Yeah.
It's a marketing ploy. So, if you want to make money off dumb Christians, here's how you do it. Sorry if you've bought Ezekiel bread. I just called you a dumb Christian, but
yeah. Well, it's like if you take Matthew 4:9 and turn that. I've seen this done on Facebook as a joke. and an indication that you should pay attention to the context. An inspirational verse for you. See, this is Matthew 4:9. All this, let's see, I will give you all things, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. Sounds nice until you know that it was Satan talking to Jesus.
Who was that? Could it be Satan?
So context really is important. People sometimes try to disparage it, but it really does matter that you get the full context of anything that is said. But again, we live in a romantic era, and so context be damned, who cares?
Well, and that's really important in the news, because the news...
Well, sound bites is all you get, and
but
you have no idea what
they purposely
leave off things.
They're like, oh, this sounds good, but if we take this off the beginning, now he looks like a real jerk. So let's just do that one. And so there are some hoaxes out there about the president that are dangerous. I know, but there are some that are out there that are really dangerous, and you just need to get the full context of it.
But it's how you feel about the politician that you hate that really matters. And so because you have decided that you're going to hate this person, then everything they do has to be interpreted as being bad, no matter what it is. And so we will find some way of looking for the cloud in the silver lining. It's like, if you do not like the Patriots, then everything the Patriots do is going to be for nefarious reasons, and it's bad. And
but we all know they were going to cheat.
Yeah.
Same with the Houston Astros. It just makes sense that they would cheat.
Yes, but again, the sports team analogy works for so many different things, because people become a part of this group, and so anything my group does is good. Anything anybody else does is bad. Again, human beings, in our development over the years, we started as tribal groups. And the tribe is everything. Your family is everything. And so anything that your tribe, that your family is doing is good. Those on the outside, not so much. And so you always interpret whatever those outside the in-group do as being a bad thing. And you find ways of excluding people from your group.
Churches become like that.
Churches very often become like that.
Somebody new comes into church and everybody looks at them circumspectly. Or they might be like, hi, how are you? What's your name? They might start to introduce themselves. Then if the person does something out of the ordinary, like, if you're a church that doesn't raise hands during worship and they do, then everybody's like, oh, that person raised their hands during worship.
Yeah, and so we make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And exclude them.
Yeah.
Or if they smell funny or whatever.
We had a former church member who moved out of town, and she messaged me because she was going to be in town, and she said, what are the requirements for coming to church? Meaning with COVID, I said, just come. And so, but I told her, I said, masks if you want to wear them, and we're socially distanced and all that stuff. So, and she did. She came, she wore a mask, and we were socially distanced, but it was good to see her. And, but yeah.
But a lot of things that we do because of emotions, not because there is any rational reason for it. Jerry Pournelle, science fiction author, would describe things as being kabuki theater.
Getting your receipt checked on the way out of Walmart is kabuki theater
because it serves no purpose.
Now, Costco, they're actually looking for stuff. Like, my daughter used to work the doors at Costco, and there's certain things they're actually looking for. Like, they want to make sure you didn't leave without your ice. They want to make sure that if you have a piece of technology that you actually paid for it. So there's certain things they're actually looking for, and she would catch a lot of things. She was quite good at working the doors. But for Walmart, it's just whatever. I just walk out. If there's a line, I just go around, because you know what? I do not have time for this at Walmart. I did not steal from your store. I'm not a criminal just because I'm shopping here. The rest of these people might be, but I am not. They can all stand in line. I have better things to do.
But, another example of where it's mostly kabuki theater, that has nothing to do with reality, is what we do at the airports. That is, we were rightly disturbed by what happened on September 11th, 2001. The reaction to it, though, was not rational. That is, there was a desire to show that we're doing something, but it didn't really matter what it was. It was just, we've got to show that we're doing something, that we care. And so we'll do this pretend thing that will make people feel better.
Because there was still, the underwear bomber got through, the shoe bomber guy got through. And there are people that have done things in airplanes since then. They got past security.
Well, there are silly things like, taking your shoes off, having to have liquids a certain tiny size, and if you have more toothpaste than what they allow, then they'll confiscate it.
Because I've often made bombs from toothpaste.
Yeah,
Crest is really the best for that.
It's just some very
Colgate
odd
not so
sorts of
much.
things. Is if we actually wanted to do something serious, then we should have looked at, say, for instance, what the Israelis do with security in airports, and then have done that. But that would have made some people uncomfortable, and we can't dare do that.
Right.
So we do this instead, which
Well-
serves no purpose beyond just makes everybody
Right.
feel like something is being done. And
Well,
that we
like
are,
the travel bans at the beginning of coronavirus.
Uh-huh.
There is a deadly virus in China. So what should you do? Stop travel in from China. Then, okay, now it's in Europe. So let's stop travel from Europe. That's actually a thing. That's a thing you can do to stop the spread of the virus around the world. I mean, it still got here, but probably it was here before the travel ban started. But still, that's like an actual thing. But if we had said, well, we're just going to take everybody's temperatures they get off the plane, that doesn't work, because you can not have a fever yet and still be symptomatic.
Yeah.
So,
well, a lot of what we're doing right now with trying to deal with COVID is probably a lot of kabuki theater as well.
I wear a sticker on my arm at work every day to say that I don't have COVID, which nobody knows if I do or not. I simply don't have a fever, and I feel fine. So basically the sticker means I'm asymptomatic. I don't know. So I wear my mask to make other people comfortable. I don't know that masks necessarily work. I don't wear a mask in my classroom. Other people come in and, they're like, do I need to wear a mask? I'm like, you do what's comfortable for you. I'm fine. Because we're not standing next to each other, They're usually across the room asking me questions. So,
Yeah.
but, and even still so if you look at it rationally, bringing children back to school. See, I was really on the fence about that. Bringing children back to school, children generally don't die from COVID. They are little germ factories, though. I mean, I was teaching, distance teaching, and this kid just sneezed all over their Chromebook. Like, in my face, I saw, achoo! And I was like,
droplets on the screen.
yeah, right, but not on me. And I'm like, that is why we are doing distance learning, because of that little germ factory right there.
Yes.
But the logistics of separating the kids when we don't, like our school, we're landlocked. We do not have any more room. We don't have any more empty classrooms. There's no place to put extra classrooms. There's just no room. So for our school, it would have been an absolute logistics nightmare to come back and do all the social distancing things that they wanted us to do to have live school. So, but then it's like, okay, so my only really serious risk factor for COVID is my weight, which is a significant one because most of the people that have died of COVID have been obese. And so if a kid comes to school and they have it and they give it to me and I die, that's not cool because I didn't sign up for that. I signed up to be a teacher, not a frontline worker or a first responder. So, it was a really hard call. But if you look at just the data, chances are everything would be fine. But the emotion of it is, I don't want to die for my job. I mean, I love teaching. It's my career. It's what I've wanted to do my whole life, but I don't want to die doing it. So, that emotional part did play in there. And I basically went along with whatever people wanted to do, I was fine with. If they wanted us to come back to school, I'd figure it out. If they wanted us to distance learn, I'd figure it out. And I'm figuring it out.
And of course, part of the problem, say, with COVID is that we really had no idea what to do about it.
Yeah.
And so, and it's been, I mean, from the beginning, nobody knew for sure what to do.
Right. Well, and I think the
Now, in hindsight, you can say, well, maybe we should have done this and this and that, but at the time,
we knew so little about it. We didn't even really know truly how it was transmitted.
Right.
The president was saying that it was transmitted through the air. It's not like a close contact, like a if I kiss you kind of thing. Like I won't get it as long as I don't kiss you kind of a thing. So the science was already showing that, but nobody really knew for sure. So I think the shutdown was good at the very beginning. Shut everything down and let's figure it out, find out more. Now I think we have enough data and we know enough, although there's a lot of conflicting stuff out there. Although the treatments are getting better.
Once everything is done and we go back and we analyze everything, then we'll figure out, okay, what we should have done and shouldn't have done. What's weird is to criticize what people were thinking and doing in February based on what we know now in September.
Well, it's like punishing people now for what was done 200 years ago. The fact that Washington owned slaves, now all of a sudden we're crucifying him for it. In the context of things, it wasn't a good thing.
No, and he wasn't comfortable with it.
No, but nobody cares about that. It's just he had slaves, so we have to rename all of our towns and our bridges and all that stuff. So judging the past based on the present is wrong. You can't do that. And if I had known then what I know now is a really good way to look at things.
We have the phrase Monday morning quarterbacking or 20/20 hindsight. Yes, based on what we know now, you look back at what decisions were made in February or March and you say, well, that was stupid. Well, maybe. But did anybody have a better idea at that time? This is what everybody thought we should do that. So that's what they did.
Yep.
And now we see, okay, well, maybe we should have done that. Who knows?
Yep.
It's very hard to, that is, what you know now doesn't really help with the past. That is, if you knew so much, then why didn't you say something back then?
Why didn't you come back from the future and tell us, smarty pants?
So we could fix it.
Yeah, in your DeLorean.
Yes. But the emphasis in an age of romanticism is on emotion and intuition and experience and how you feel about things and are you comfortable, and it has nothing to do, it disparages the rational and the complicated. That's the other aspect of it too, is that, and of course, again, human nature, we want simple solutions, easy answers to the problems. Some things are not easy. Some things are very complicated. Some things are very hard. Sometimes you're faced with choices that none of them are all that good.
Well, this is a really good example that I heard somebody say. I think it was Matt Gaetz, because I listened to his Hot Takes podcast. I'm kind of addicted to podcasts right now. So his thing was, we could eliminate all highway deaths by making every speed limit 10 miles an hour, but it's not very efficient if you have to commute to work. Like a lot of people in our valley commute to LA, and it already takes them an hour and a half without traffic to get there. If everybody was going 10 miles an hour, it would take them about a month to get to work. So that's impractical. So we accept the risk of driving with a speed limit of 65 where speeds can go to 80 or more, but we accept those risks so that we can get to work. And we have to change how we look at COVID and be like, okay, this is a risk, but I have to work. Like the people who have worked at Walmart the entire time. I would really love to know what the death rate is among Walmart employees. Of all the Walmart employees in the nation, how many died of COVID? You don't hear about that. So they may have gotten sick, but how many actually died of COVID? You have, now, obviously with the elderly and people in nursing homes, that's a different story. Like My mom, we kept her off from work as long as we could. She's 80 years old. She has underlying health conditions. She's just recovering from chemotherapy. When the shutdown happened, she was less than a year out of her chemotherapy treatments. And so she went on a hard lockdown. She stayed in her house. My daughter went grocery shopping for her one time. My sister was getting stuff for her. Her boarder was getting things for her. But then in June, her job told her, if you want to work, you need to come back at the beginning of June. And I told her, I said, you're really good about using the sanitizing wipes, which does kill COVID, which is bizarre to me. She's very good about hand sanitizer. She washes her hands a lot. So I told her, they're providing her with masks, and her job is primarily outside. And so I told her, I said, I'm good with you going back. And she's been working since the beginning of June, and she has not had any symptoms. Now, here's an interesting thing, too. One of the men in our church is in a nursing home. He's a black man, and black people of color tend to have more trouble with COVID than white people. It may be a vitamin D absorption thing, because vitamin D has been shown to be really effective against COVID. And people of color have a harder time absorbing vitamin D, and then particularly people in nursing homes because they don't get outside much. Anyway, he was admitted to the COVID ward. He tested positive. Every 2 weeks they do testing of the whole nursing home employees and patients. And he tested positive. They put him in the isolation ward. They called me because I'm on his list of people to call. And he was asymptomatic at the time. He was only in there maybe 2 weeks, week and a half. And they called me at work Thursday or Friday. And I panicked a little bit because I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't going to be good, because I thought for sure he would die from this. And she said, well, I'm just calling to let you know that we've moved him into a regular room. And it wasn't a nurse. Actually, no, I was called before that. It was Wednesday. I got the call from the person that wasn't a nurse. So I asked them, do you have symptoms? She goes, I don't really know. I'm not a nurse. You have to talk to a nurse. Well, she must have left a message for the nurse to call me, because I got a call at work yesterday. So I freaked out, both times, because I'm like, uh-oh, this is it. And then she said, we want to let you know he just had really mild symptoms. He lost a few pounds, so we're supplementing his diet, but he seems fine now. And I asked, do you have a negative test? And so we haven't tested yet. She said, but he doesn't have any symptoms, so we felt he was safe to go back to a regular room. So, even in a nursing home, you can survive this thing if you're doing all the things that you need to do. And so that's why I'm thinking, outside of the logistical nightmare of school, and little kids can't stay away from each other. I'm sorry. They are climbing on each other. They would chew on their masks, and then they'd be like, there's
you got
the meme.
Cool mask.
Yeah, let's trade. Well, they trade their lunch food even. Their mom makes them a lunch, and they trade with their friends. And I always tell my kids, your mom made, or your adult, we don't call them moms because not everybody lives with their mom. Your adult made your lunch for you, just for you. Please honor them by eating it and not trading it. So, because they'll trade for like the school lunch, which I would argue isn't any healthier. But, Tim said 2 Chicago Walmart workers from the same store died before April 5th. Okay, that's the only 2 I know about. Of all the Walmart workers, that's pretty impressive. Now, my daughter and her boyfriend our daughter and her boyfriend work for Amazon, and they've worked the entire time, and they've had a few people get sick. She hasn't gotten sick.
Not
her boyfriend
in their warehouse, I think.
No, some people in their warehouse did.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and as a matter of fact, she's on business right now, being trained in another thing, whatever they call them, warehouses, and somebody from there, his wife tested positive, so he's out until he can get tested, till his test comes back. But it's somebody she was exposed to 2 weeks ago, but she hasn't shown any symptoms, so, because she was just there a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
But anyway, we don't quite have 10 minutes left in the show, so I won't restart the timer.
Oh,
so
okay.
We have like 7 minutes.
Okay, any other comments?
Nope, that was just kind of it. Yeah, Tim said don't blow up the toothpaste, back when I was talking about how dangerous toothpaste can be on airplanes. So.
And of course, the pendulum will eventually swing away from the extreme emotional state that we're in now towards a more rational era. The first Romantic era from 1800 to 1890 was a reaction against the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment. And so we're now in another Romantic era, reacting against, well, perhaps some of the rationality of the 20th century, at least the second half of it. It is what the Allies' victory over the Axis was dependent upon technology. It is superior technology and superior tactics, superior thinking on the part of the Allies. A lot of the it may to some extent also be a reaction against some of the things that came out of that technology and science that was developed during that period of time. For instance, nuclear weapons, because that scared people. That's the other aspect of things too, is that if people don't understand something, they will react to it emotionally in a negative way.
Well, like my dog.
Yes.
He doesn't understand that piece of machinery I was using, and it freaked him out.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the cat getting upset by a Roomba running around.
Yeah.
It doesn't smell like it's alive, but it's acting like it's alive, and so it's confusing for the poor animal. You see it reflected in those people that think vaccines are bad. That is, they're reacting emotionally, not based on any rational reasons. Also, the opposition to genetically modified organisms is irrational reaction, again based on emotion. Or people that are afraid of, say, 5G and think that somehow it's going to burn out their brains or something. It's, again, emotions, and it's based on not understanding, not knowing the data. And being a Romantic era, the data doesn't matter anyway.
One of my favorite things to do in the grocery store is when things say non-GMO, I'll walk around like looking on the shelves going, where are the genetically modified organisms? That's what I want.
Yes.
I want the GMOs. And people look at me like I've lost my mind.
The thing is, though, every single thing we eat is genetically modified.
You're genetically modified.
That is,
otherwise, you would be inbred.
That is, none of the food that we currently eat as human beings is the original thing. That is, if you go back, a couple hundred years, watermelons are not nearly as nice as they are now. If you go back a couple hundred years, you don't have bananas. The original apples are not very tasty, and so on. You keep
corn.
Well, corn is completely artificial. In fact, it's so heavily modified that it can't even reproduce itself. That is, if human beings were to disappear, it would disappear too, because it wouldn't be able to reproduce itself. It has to be done artificially. Now, of course, that type of genetic modification was done gradually over time through selective breeding, but it's the same concept. Modern genetic modification is done quicker, but it's doing the exact same sorts of things that we've always done, or crossbreeding. Mules do not scare me, but they are genetically modified organisms. They're a cross between donkeys and horses.
If you're behind one, that should scare you.
Well, yes.
When I was in Australia, we stayed 2 days, one night on a cattle ranch. And so we got a little bit of ranching experience. This poor cow got preg tested by every teenager on our tour. There were like 30 of them. And then he was also castrating the young bulls. And the boys weren't big on that. The girls thought it was more intriguing than the boys did. But
You're all sadists at heart.
Yes, he offered them Rocky Mountain oysters, but they weren't
interested.
No, they weren't interested. We did swim. We did swim in a billabong. But anyway, so the kids had a lot of questions for him about how he raises his cattle, and because his cattle are free range within reason. He's got fencing around his property, but it's quite large. So he said that he'll have like they said, because he doesn't have a lot in the way of barns, and they said, do you have a place where you keep your cows, like when they're ready to have their babies? And he said, no, they just usually have them out in the field somewhere. And they said, well, what if they're having problems having the baby? What do you do? And he said, well, if I happen to see it, he goes, I might intervene. He said, but you don't want a defective calf from a defective cow. You want a good, healthy stock to be breeding. So generally, if a cow dies or the calf dies, it was important that happened to kind of keep the line really clean genetically, which also sounds like something else. But and then he said if he has a bull that's particularly ornery or doesn't get along well with others, he'll have it slaughtered and sold off, take it to the butcher like immediately, because he doesn't want a bunch of cows and bulls that don't get along, because they all have to live out there. They all have to, live together and get along. And he needs those bulls to impregnate those cows, and he doesn't want the bulls hurting the cows. So anyway, so it was really quite interesting, because he was like forced natural selection. But really it's genetically modifying, because if you don't allow a bull to breed, you're genetically modifying them.
The other thing to notice in that too is the reasoning and rationality of that. That is, rather than the feelings, oh, this poor cow, it's a very rational decision and choice that's being made, that you want the best possible stock, and so unfortunately bad things are going to happen to this particular cow that's just not up to snuff.
Right. And then you have people like my friend who's a vegetarian. She'd like to be vegan, but she can't give up eggs. But the reason why she's vegetarian, she has been since she was 13. She's a little bit older than I am. Because she would cry over animals that, just sick animals, and they didn't have to be in her presence, just something that she thought about all the time. And so she would cry and feel bad for the animals. And she's not grown up around farms. She grew up in Santa Monica in a wealthy neighborhood. So it's a very non-lethal environment for animals. And so, but see, I grew up around farms. We lived in Pennsylvania and New Jersey when I was a kid. And so there were a lot of farms around there. My grandparents would take me to the farm. And my grandparents lived in Africa, and your food did not come packaged up all nice from Costco or from Walmart. You had to kill it. My grandfather hunted. He would snap the necks on the chickens, and my grandmother did the gardening, which isn't as cruel, but it's, you have to survive. And as long as God has said that animals are good for eating, just like vegetables. Now, I'll tease her about being vegetarian, but I don't make a big deal out of it, because of the scripture that says that just because I have a conviction over something doesn't mean that I should make someone else feel bad for their convictions.
Right.
So I respect the fact that she feels bad for animals, and even though I'll tease her sometimes, like, okay, he has this saying, how do you eat a herd of cattle? One hamburger at a time. And it's for overcoming overwhelming tasks. Like, you have a big job you have to do, you do it in little pieces. And so that's kind of his saying. So she gets really overwhelmed by stuff we're doing at work. And so I'll tell her, I'll say, how do you eat an entire garden? One carrot at a time. And she knows that what you're saying is, and that I changed it for her. And she knows I'm teasing her, but she just knows. She knows.
Yeah, but it's still
teasing.
A useful thing to keep in mind.
Right. But she respects the fact that I eat meat. She doesn't criticize me. I don't criticize her for eating vegetables. That's just how she chooses to live her life. But she's so emotionally, like, she says that she loves animals more than she loves people. People are horrible, and she doesn't care if people die. She probably might be in favor of Soylent Green. I don't know. But she using animals for food, and even animal products like eggs. She doesn't think that animals should work for human benefit. So I do think that a pig gives up more for my breakfast than a chicken does, but
Yes, usually.
Yeah. So,
Okay, well,
Tim said we should chase the dog with BB-8. BB-8 lives here at the church in his office.
Yes.
The dog lives at home with me, so.
Okay, well, we are at the end of our time.
Okay.
Although we started a little bit late.
Yes,
so
we
it's
did.
Fine.
So, plus we're not on time constraints. It's
I
not like
know.
somebody else needs the studio.
Yes.
Okay, so next week is intersectionality, racial,
Radical.
racial critical race theory.
Yes.
I'm just learning that term, and the one verse. So we hope you guys will join us. Yes, that was regarding the Roomba, but our Roomba died, so we have to get a new one. She kind of got dementia, and so we let her die a death with dignity. She's now in the garage waiting to go to the electronic recycle, but because that's what you do when your robots die. But anyway, so I hope you guys will join us because it should be really interesting. And I think it will shed some light on a lot of things that are happening right now in America with like the Oscars and some of this other stuff.
And it grows out of what we talked about today,
Yeah.
living in a romantic period of time.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So we'll see you next week.